The sun blazed confidently over Oakwood Park, its golden light cascading through the dense canopy of oak trees and shimmering across the lake's surface. The air was alive with the mingling scents of freshly cut grass, sizzling barbecue, and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers. It was the kind of day that seemed to hum with promise, where time slowed just enough to savor the small joys of life. Families sprawled on picnic blankets, children darted between trees, and the unmistakable melody of a street performer's harmonica floated on the breeze. At the center of this sunlit haven stood the Johnsons, a family whose presence radiated warmth and belonging. Marcus, a man whose steady hands had soothed countless sick children as a pediatrician, now wielded a pair of tongs with the same precision, flipping burgers and ribs with practiced ease. Lydia, his wife, exuded quiet confidence as she arranged a vibrant array of dishes on the picnic table, her sharp mind and eloquent prose as an author reflected in the thoughtful details of her feast. Their children, Zoe and Tyler, were whirlwinds of energy, their laughter ringing like bells as they played tag with a group of neighborhood kids. This wasn't just a barbecue, it was a tradition. For over a decade, the Johnson family's annual gathering had drawn the community together, a tapestry of faces and stories woven from every corner of Oakwood. It was a celebration of connection, a reminder that even in a world often divided, there were still places where people came together to share food, laughter, and life. Yet, as the Johnsons' gathering thrived, a shadow loomed at the park's edge. Karen Whitfield, perched stiffly on a bench beneath the shade of a sprawling oak, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. A recent transplant to the neighborhood, Karen carried with her an air of entitlement that clashed with Oakwood's inclusive spirit. Her meticulously styled hair and designer sunglasses spoke of a life lived in curated perfection, one where control was paramount. To her, the Johnsons' celebration was more than just a disruption, it was an affront. The prime picnic spot, the one she had envisioned for her own event next weekend, was now occupied by a family she had deemed unworthy of such prominence. Karen's discontent simmered as she tightened her grip on her smartphone. Her gaze flicked to the diverse crowd surrounding the Johnsons, neighbors of every background chatting easily, their children playing together without a care. It was a scene that should have been a testament to unity, but to Karen, it was a challenge to her carefully constructed worldview. Her thumb hovered over the screen, the number for the police already dialed. She hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing against her chest like the oppressive heat of the summer sun. The park seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faltered, the rustling leaves stilled, and even the lake's gentle ripples seemed to pause. Unseen but undeniable, a tension crackled in the air, as though the universe itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Karen's call, born of prejudice and privilege, would set off a chain reaction that no one in Oakwood could have anticipated. It would test the bonds of the community, expose the hidden fractures in its foundation, and force everyone, from the Johnsons to the responding officers to the bystanders, to confront uncomfortable truths. This was no ordinary summer day. Beneath the surface of its picturesque charm, Oakwood Park was about to become a crucible, a place where ideals would be tested and identities laid bare. As Karen's finger inched closer to the screen, the delicate balance of the moment teetered. What would follow would ripple far beyond the boundaries of the park, igniting conversations that would echo across the nation. The stage was set, the players unknowingly stepping into their roles. In the hours to come, lives would be irrevocably changed, and a community would be forced to reckon with the realities of privilege, prejudice, and the power of standing together. And as the first tendrils of smoke curled from the grill, it became clear that this day would leave more than just the scent of barbecue in the air. It would leave a legacy. The story unfolds in Evoria, a sprawling world where ancient magic intertwines with crumbling technology. Towering cities of glass and steel stand amidst untamed wilderness, while remnants of a forgotten civilization scatter the landscape. The skies are streaked with floating islands, tethered by shimmering energy veins, and the air hums with a faint, mysterious resonance. Beneath the surface, labyrinthine tunnels conceal secrets that many fear to uncover. Kale, a brooding wanderer with a scarred past, seeks redemption for a tragedy he caused during a failed rebellion. His piercing green eyes and a mechanical arm, salvaged from ancient tech, mark him as both a survivor and an outcast. Meanwhile, Lyra, a fiercely intelligent scholar with an affinity for decoding forgotten languages, is driven by her desire to uncover the truth of Evoria's lost era. Her quiet demeanor hides a relentless determination, and her bond with Kale is one of mutual respect, though tinged with unspoken tension. The two are joined by Ren, a cunning thief with a quick wit and a knack for slipping through the cracks of society. Ren's motivations are less noble, wealth and survival, but his loyalty to the group deepens as the stakes rise. Completing the group is Ira, a mystic tied to the floating islands, whose cryptic visions and ethereal presence suggest she knows more about the world's mysteries than she lets on. Her connection to Kale hints at a shared history neither fully understands. The environment is as much a character as the people within it. The wilderness is alive, with bioluminescent flora and fauna that pulse with energy, while the cities are cold and oppressive, ruled by a council that hoards technology and magic alike. The tension between urban control and wild freedom mirrors the internal struggles of the characters, each wrestling with their own sense of purpose. As the story begins, Kale seeks to atone by aiding Lyra in her quest to unlock the secrets of an ancient artifact, while Ren sees it as an opportunity for profit. Ira, however, warns of a greater danger tied to their actions, her visions growing darker with each passing day. Together, they must navigate a world teetering on the edge of collapse, their fates intertwined with the unraveling mysteries of Evoria. As the sun dipped lower, tensions erupted when Karen, fueled by entitlement and simmering resentment, called the police on the Johnsons, claiming they were disturbing the peace. The arrival of officers fractured the park's harmony, exposing hidden biases among onlookers and sparking a heated confrontation that would unravel buried secrets, redefine alliances, and alter Oakwood forever. On the outskirts of a bustling city, three strangers, Lila, a determined journalist, Marcus, a struggling inventor, and Elena, a reserved botanist, find themselves drawn together by a mysterious letter promising answers to their individual quests. Lila seeks to uncover corruption within a powerful corporation, Marcus dreams of perfecting a renewable energy device, and Elena hopes to save an endangered plant species critical to her research. The letter hints at a hidden archive that could hold the solutions they each desperately need. Their initial meeting is strained, as their differing personalities clash. Lila's assertiveness grates on Marcus's cautious nature, while Elena's quiet demeanor makes her seem aloof. Despite their differences, they agree to work together, realizing the archive is heavily guarded and impossible to access alone. Their first obstacle arises when they discover the archive is located beneath a high-security corporate building owned by the very company Lila is investigating. As they begin planning, tensions grow. Lila's risk-taking mindset leads to arguments with Marcus, who fears exposure. Meanwhile, Elena starts to bond with Marcus over their shared love of science, creating an undercurrent of camaraderie that begins to balance the group dynamic. Lila, though frustrated, starts to see the value in their cautious approach, even as her impatience simmers beneath the surface. A subplot emerges when Elena receives a cryptic message from a former mentor, hinting at a betrayal tied to her endangered plant research. This revelation adds urgency to her goal, as she realizes the corporation may be involved in the plant's disappearance. Marcus, meanwhile, faces a personal dilemma. His prototype device malfunctions, forcing him to choose between fixing it or focusing entirely on the mission. Their first attempt to infiltrate the building ends in failure when a security breach triggers an alarm, forcing them to flee. This setback shakes their confidence, but it also strengthens their resolve. Lila begins to trust Marcus's methodical planning, while Marcus admires Lila's determination. Elena, stepping out of her comfort zone, proposes an unconventional solution using her botanical expertise to bypass the building's surveillance system. As the group regroups, they start to see each other in a new light. Lila's leadership, Marcus's ingenuity, and Elena's resourcefulness begin to complement one another. Though the road ahead remains uncertain, their shared goals and growing trust set the stage for a deeper alliance, even as new challenges loom on the horizon. The morning began like any other in the quiet town of Havenbrook, with the hum of coffee machines and the distant chatter of neighbors exchanging pleasantries. But as the clock struck 8:17 a.m., smoke billowed from the town square, where the historic clock tower now lay in ruins. People rushed to the scene, their faces pale with confusion and fear. Among them was Clara, a local journalist, who had been sipping her coffee just moments before. The destruction was unlike anything Havenbrook had ever seen, and the absence of any immediate explanation left the townsfolk reeling. As Clara surveyed the wreckage, she noticed something peculiar, a small, metallic device half buried in the rubble. It blinked with a faint blue light, emitting a soft hum that sent chills down her spine. Instinctively, she pocketed it before the authorities arrived. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan, a reclusive engineer, received a cryptic email containing blueprints eerily similar to the device Clara had found. The message was unsigned but bore a single ominous line: "They're coming. Stop them before it's too late." By noon, rumors of sabotage and conspiracy spread like wildfire. The town's mayor called for calm, but panic was already taking hold. Clara, driven by her journalistic instincts, began piecing together clues from the scene. Her investigation led her to Ethan, whose reluctance to engage only deepened her suspicions. Yet, when she revealed the device she had found, his demeanor shifted from worry to alarmed. "This isn't just a bomb," Ethan muttered, studying the object. "It's a signal. And whoever sent it isn't done." The realization hit hard. The explosion was only the beginning. Clara and Ethan, an unlikely duo, found themselves thrust into a race against time. The device's mysterious origins hinted at a larger, more sinister plan. As they delved deeper, they uncovered a network of encrypted messages pointing to a shadowy organization operating in the shadows of Havenbrook. Each clue they unraveled brought them closer to the truth, but also painted a target on their backs. Their routine lives were now a distant memory. Clara's determination to uncover the story clashed with Ethan's cautious approach, but both knew the stakes were too high to back down. The urgency of their mission grew with every passing hour, as the town's unease turned to outright chaos. The once quiet Havenbrook was now a battleground of secrets, lies, and unseen threats. The inciting incident had irrevocably altered the fabric of their lives. Clara and Ethan, bound by circumstance, were forced to confront not only the dangers lurking in the shadows but also their own fears and limitations. The explosion had been the spark, but the fire it ignited would challenge everything they thought they knew about their town and themselves. The sun continued its golden arc over Oakwood Park, casting elongated shadows as the afternoon deepened. The Johnsons' barbecue was in full swing, with new faces arriving to join the festivities. Among them was Javier Morales, a local high school teacher and chess enthusiast, who had brought his portable chessboard, challenging anyone willing to test their wits. Nearby, Priya Patel, an ER nurse, balanced a plate of food while keeping an eye on her toddler, who toddled precariously close to the lake's edge. The park was alive with the hum of connection, a mosaic of cultures and stories intertwining under the oaks. Karen Whitfield, however, remained rooted to her bench, her irritation festering. She glanced at her watch, muttering under her breath as she observed the growing crowd. Her annoyance was no longer just about the picnic spot. The laughter, the camaraderie, the easy mingling of people from different backgrounds, it all seemed to needle at her. She scrolled through her phone, her thumb hesitating over the number she had looked up earlier. A part of her knew the consequences of her actions could spiral, but her sense of entitlement drowned out any whispers of doubt. Meanwhile, across the park, another dynamic was unfolding. Officer Daniel Hayes, a seasoned member of the Oakwood Police Department, was on patrol with his rookie partner, Officer Emily Tran. Daniel, a man nearing retirement, had seen his fair share of disputes in the community, from noise complaints to neighborhood squabbles. Emily, fresh out of the academy, was eager but still learning the nuances of de-escalation. As they strolled past families and joggers, Daniel shared stories of his early days on the force, his tone a mix of nostalgia and caution. Neither of them knew they were about to be thrust into a situation that would test their training and their humanity. Back at the barbecue, Lydia Johnson noticed Karen's lingering presence. Lydia had a knack for reading people, a skill honed both as a writer and as someone who had faced subtle and overt prejudice throughout her life. Karen's stiff posture and furtive glances were impossible to miss. Lydia nudged Marcus, who was flipping burgers with practiced ease. "Do you know her?" Karen's direction. Marcus followed her gaze and shook his head. "No, but she doesn't look too happy about us being here," he replied, his voice tinged with concern. As the tension simmered, a young boy named Ethan, who had been playing tag with Zoe and Tyler, stumbled and scraped his knee. His cry drew the attention of everyone nearby, including Karen. Marcus immediately set down his tongs and rushed over, his medical instincts kicking in. He examined Ethan's knee, reassuring the boy and his worried mother, a single parent named Rachel who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Karen watched the scene unfold, her expression unreadable as Marcus calmly cleaned the wound and offered advice on care. For a brief moment, her finger hovered uncertainly over her phone. But the moment passed. Karen's indignation surged anew, fueled by her perception of being overshadowed in a space she felt entitled to. She pressed the call button. Across the park, Daniel's radio crackled to life, summoning him and Emily to the scene. As they made their way toward the picnic area, Daniel's expression darkened. "Another park complaint," he muttered. "Let's hope it's nothing serious." Unbeknownst to Karen, her call had been overheard by a group of teenagers sitting nearby. Among them was Mia-chan, an aspiring journalist with a knack for capturing moments on her phone. Sensing that something significant was about to unfold, she discreetly began recording. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary dispute, and she was determined to document the truth. As the officers approached and the crowd grew quieter, the stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond Oakwood Park. The barbecue, once a symbol of unity, was now the epicenter of a brewing storm. But within the tension lay the seeds of change, waiting to take root in the hearts of those willing to listen and learn. The sun's golden rays continued to filter through the towering oaks, but an invisible tension began to creep into the idyllic scene at Oakwood Park. Karen Whitfield's finger hovered over her phone, her expression a cocktail of entitlement and simmering frustration. Across the park, Marcus flipped burgers with practiced ease, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few yards away. Lydia, her laughter ringing out as she teased Zoe about her grass-stained knees, noticed Karen's lingering gaze but dismissed it as harmless curiosity. She had no idea that Karen's discontent had already begun to take root. Meanwhile, other threads of conflict quietly wove themselves into the day. Near the edge of the picnic area, Marcus's colleague, Dr. Elena Ramirez, was deep in conversation with Lydia's brother, Eric. Their discussion, initially cordial, had turned heated over a recent hospital policy that disproportionately impacted low-income patients. Eric, a public defender, was relentless in his critique of the systemic inequities, while Elena, though sympathetic, felt constrained by the bureaucracy she navigated daily. Their argument, though hushed, carried an undercurrent of frustration that mirrored the larger tensions simmering in the park. At the same time, Tyler and his best friend, Jamal, had ventured too close to the water's edge, their laughter abruptly silenced when Jamal slipped on the muddy bank and tumbled into the lake. The splash drew immediate attention, and Marcus sprinted toward the boys, pulling Jamal to safety. Though the incident ended without injury, Karen seized the moment, her phone now pressed to her ear. To her, the commotion confirmed her worst assumptions about the Johnsons and their gathering. She described the scene with deliberate exaggeration, her voice dripping with feigned concern as she relayed her version of events to the dispatcher. The first responders arrived faster than anyone anticipated, their presence casting a shadow over the once festive atmosphere. Conversations faltered, and the music from a nearby guitar trailed off as the officers approached the Johnsons' picnic area. Marcus, still damp from his rescue of Jamal, stepped forward to greet them, his demeanor calm but wary. Lydia's smile faltered as she instinctively placed a protective hand on Zoe's shoulder. The crowd, a tapestry of friends and neighbors, began to gather, their murmurs a mix of confusion and unease. Karen, emboldened by the arrival of the police, strode toward the scene, her voice cutting through the silence. She painted a picture of chaos and disorder, her words laced with implicit bias that did not go unnoticed by the onlookers. But as she spoke, her narrative began to unravel. Eric, still fired up from his earlier debate, stepped forward to challenge her claims, his voice steady and resolute. Elena, despite their earlier disagreement, joined him, her professional credibility lending weight to their defense of the Johnsons. The officers, caught between conflicting accounts, hesitated. It was then that a young woman named Priya, a local journalist who had been documenting the barbecue for a community feature, stepped forward with her camera. She offered to share footage that contradicted Karen's allegations, her actions a quiet but powerful act of solidarity. The crowd, emboldened by her courage, began to voice their support for the Johnsons, their collective outrage drowning out Karen's protests. As the situation unfolded, Karen found herself increasingly isolated. Her carefully constructed facade of concern crumbled under the weight of the community's unity and the undeniable evidence against her claims. The officers, recognizing the truth, issued a warning to Karen for filing a false report before departing. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a cathartic release of the tension that had gripped the park. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the Johnsons' barbecue had transformed into something far greater than a neighborhood tradition. It had become a testament to the strength of community, the power of truth, and the courage to confront prejudice head-on. As the last embers of the grill glowed faintly in the twilight, the Johnsons stood surrounded by friends and allies, their bond stronger than ever. The day's events had left an indelible mark on Oakwood Park, a reminder that even in the face of ignorance, unity and justice could prevail. The sun continued its golden arc over Oakwood Park, but the atmosphere subtly shifted. Karen Whitfield's finger hovered over her phone, her expression hardening as she debated her next move. Across the park, Zoe and Tyler's laughter rang out, oblivious to the storm brewing nearby. Lydia, catching a glimpse of Karen's intense stare, felt an inexplicable unease creep over her. She brushed it off, focusing instead on helping Marcus plate the first batch of burgers. But the moment lingered, heavy and unspoken. Karen's call connected, her voice sharp and clipped as she described a suspicious gathering at the park. Her words were deliberate, laced with coded language that painted the Johnsons and their friends as out of place. The dispatcher's neutral tone offered no clue as to how the situation would unfold, but Karen's satisfaction was palpable as she ended the call, her lips curling into a tight, self-assured smile. She leaned back on the bench, confident she had taken control of the narrative. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens pierced the idyllic scene. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and a ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Marcus, ever the calm presence, exchanged a glance with Lydia. "Stay with the kids," he murmured, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of concern. He stepped forward, his hands raised slightly, as two officers approached the gathering. The tension was immediate and electric. Karen rose from her bench, her posture triumphant as she gestured toward the Johnsons. "There," she said, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of onlookers. "I've been watching them. They've been acting suspiciously." One of the officers, a younger man with a cautious demeanor, scanned the scene. His partner, older and more rigid, stepped forward, addressing Marcus with a curt, "We've had a report of suspicious activity. Can you explain what's going on here?" Marcus, his voice calm but firm, replied, "We're hosting a barbecue for our friends and neighbors. This is our annual tradition." As the exchange unfolded, bystanders began pulling out their phones, recording the interaction. Lydia, her heart pounding, moved closer, her maternal instincts on high alert. Zoe and Tyler clung to her legs, their earlier joy replaced by confusion and fear. The diverse group of guests, initially silent, began to speak up, their voices a chorus of support for the Johnsons. "This is ridiculous," one neighbor said. They've been nothing but kind and generous to this community. Karen's confidence began to waver as the tide of public opinion turned against her. The younger officer, visibly uncomfortable, glanced at his partner. "There doesn't seem to be any issue here," he said quietly. But the older officer hesitated, his hand resting on his belt as he weighed the situation. The crowd's energy grew charged, a mix of frustration, solidarity, and defiance. In that moment, a young woman stepped forward from the gathering. Her name was Priya, a local journalist who had attended the barbecue with her family. She addressed the officers directly, her voice clear and unwavering. "This is a peaceful gathering. There's no law being broken here. But what's happening right now? This is a story the world needs to see." Her words carried weight, and the officers exchanged a look, the younger one nodding subtly. Karen, sensing the shift, tried to interject. "I was just looking out for the community," she said, her tone defensive. But her words rang hollow against the backdrop of solidarity forming around the Johnsons. The officers, after a brief but tense discussion, decided to leave. Their departure met with a collective sigh of relief. As the patrol car disappeared down the road, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a mix of triumph and catharsis. Marcus and Lydia embraced their children, their relief palpable. But the moment was bittersweet, a stark reminder of the challenges they faced despite their contributions to the community. Karen, now isolated and visibly shaken, gathered her belongings and left the park without a word. The barbecue resumed, but the mood had shifted. Conversations turned to deeper topics: systemic bias, the power of community, and the importance of standing together. Priya, inspired by what she had witnessed, made a quiet promise to amplify the story, knowing its potential to spark meaningful dialogue. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over Oakwood Park, one thing was clear: this day would not be forgotten. It marked a turning point, not just for the Johnsons, but for everyone who had been present. The sparks of confrontation had ignited something far greater, a collective resolve to confront prejudice and champion justice, one act of courage at a time. The sun continued its steady arc across the sky, casting long shadows over Oakwood Park as the afternoon wore on. The Johnsons' barbecue was in full swing, with neighbors mingling and laughter echoing through the trees. Marcus flipped burgers with practiced ease, while Lydia engaged in animated conversation with their next-door neighbor, Mr. Patel, who had brought his famous mango chutney to share. Zoe and Tyler had teamed up with a group of kids to organize an impromptu water balloon fight, their shrieks of delight punctuating the warm summer air. Yet, not all was as harmonious as it seemed. On the outskirts of the gathering, Karen remained seated on her bench, her expression a mask of barely contained irritation. She scrolled through her phone, her mind racing with thoughts of perceived slights and imagined offenses. Her eyes flicked toward the Johnsons' table, where guests of all backgrounds laughed and shared stories. To Karen, this scene was not a celebration of community but a disruption of the order she believed should prevail. She had always prided herself on maintaining a certain standard in her surroundings, and this gathering challenged her narrow definition of what that meant. Meanwhile, across the park, a quiet observer had taken notice of Karen's simmering discontent. Elena Morales, a local journalist and longtime friend of the Johnsons, had been documenting the barbecue for an article about community traditions. She had initially dismissed Karen's presence as that of a casual passerby, but the woman's tense body language and furtive glances toward the gathering caught her attention. Elena's instincts, honed by years of covering human interest stories, told her that something was amiss. As Karen's finger hovered over her phone, Elena discreetly moved closer, her camera slung over her shoulder. She wasn't sure what Karen intended to do, but the air around her seemed charged with a quiet menace. Elena made a mental note to stay vigilant, her journalistic curiosity piqued by the potential for a story unfolding right before her eyes. Back at the barbecue, Marcus noticed Lydia's smile falter as she glanced toward the bench where Karen sat. "Everything okay?" Lydia hesitated before nodding, though her eyes betrayed her unease. "I just have a feeling," she murmured, "like we're being watched." "Not in a good way." Marcus followed her gaze and caught sight of Karen's stiff posture. He didn't recognize her but made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation. As the afternoon progressed, the barbecue began to wind down. Guests gathered around the picnic table for a final toast, raising their glasses to the Johnsons for their hospitality. It was a moment of unity, a snapshot of what the neighborhood could be at its best. Yet, even as the group laughed and clinked their glasses, Karen's disapproving glare remained fixed on them, her phone now clutched tightly in her hand. Just as the toast concluded, a commotion erupted near the parking lot. A teenage boy, no older than 16, was being confronted by a park security officer. The boy, who had been skateboarding near the lake, looked frightened and confused as the officer demanded to see identification. Several barbecue guests, including Marcus and Lydia, turned their attention to the scene, their expressions shifting from joy to concern. Karen's lips curled into a faint smirk as she observed the unfolding drama. She had called the park's security hotline earlier, claiming that unruly teens were causing a disturbance. She hadn't expected such a swift response, but the sight of the officer confronting the boy gave her a twisted sense of validation. What Karen didn't anticipate, however, was the reaction of the Johnsons and their guests. Without hesitation, Marcus and Lydia approached the officer, their calm yet firm demeanor diffusing some of the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but resolute. The boy, who introduced himself as Jamal, explained that he had been skateboarding on the path and wasn't aware it was against park rules. Lydia quickly offered to help mediate, while Elena, who had been documenting the barbecue, began recording the interaction from a respectful distance. Karen's satisfaction quickly turned to unease as she realized her actions were drawing attention. She hadn't expected the Johnsons to step in, nor had she anticipated the growing crowd of onlookers who were now questioning the officer's response. As the situation unfolded, Karen felt a pang of doubt, though she quickly suppressed it. After all, she told herself, she was only trying to maintain order. But the seeds of change had already been planted. The Johnsons' intervention, Elena's documentation, and the community's collective response would soon ripple far beyond Oakwood Park. What began as a simple barbecue was evolving into something much larger, a confrontation with prejudice, a test of solidarity, and a catalyst for transformation. The sun continued its golden reign over Oakwood Park, but the warmth in the air was beginning to feel heavier, as if the universe itself sensed the impending shift. Marcus flipped the last batch of burgers, his practiced hands steady, though his mind wandered to the unsettling news he'd read that morning about a neighboring town's racially charged incident. Lydia, ever perceptive, caught the flicker of worry in his eyes but said nothing, choosing instead to focus on keeping the day's mood light for their children. Zoe and Tyler, oblivious to the undercurrents, darted around the picnic tables, their laughter a shield against the complexities of the adult world. Karen Whitfield's phone hovered in her hand, her internal conflict deepening. She wasn't entirely sure what she hoped to achieve by making the call, but the gnawing sense of entitlement and the need to assert control over the park's proper order pushed her closer to action. Her hesitation, however, did not go unnoticed. A young woman sitting nearby, headphones around her neck and a sketchbook in her lap, had been quietly observing Karen's growing agitation. The artist, who went by Danny, felt her pulse quicken as she realized what was about to happen. She debated intervening, her own fears of confrontation clashing with her moral compass. Meanwhile, across the park, Officer James Carter sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee and reviewing his notes from the morning. A veteran of the force, James had grown weary of the calls that seemed to stem more from prejudice than legitimate concern. He had seen too many situations escalate unnecessarily, and the weight of those experiences sat heavily on his shoulders. When the call finally came through, his jaw tightened. He didn't need the dispatcher's clipped tone to know this was going to be one of those calls. Back at the barbecue, Lydia noticed Danny approaching their group, her steps hesitant but purposeful. Danny introduced herself quickly, her voice low as she explained what she had seen. Lydia's smile faltered for just a moment before she thanked Danny, her mind already racing. Marcus, overhearing, set down the spatula and joined them, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing within. They both knew they had to prepare for what might come next, even as they hoped it wouldn't. Karen's call had been placed, and the officers were en route. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the park seemed to come alive in a way Karen hadn't anticipated. Neighbors who had once been strangers began to gather closer to the Johnsons, their presence a quiet but powerful act of solidarity. The elderly couple who had lived next door to the Johnsons for years brought over a plate of cookies, their smiles warm but their eyes watchful. A group of teenagers who often played basketball with Tyler formed a loose circle nearby, their casual stance belying their readiness to step in if needed. When the patrol car finally pulled up, Officer Carter stepped out, his expression unreadable. Karen rose from her bench, her posture stiff with indignation, while the Johnsons stood calmly, their children now by their side. The crowd that had gathered held its collective breath, the tension palpable. Carter took in the scene with a practiced eye, his years of experience allowing him to piece together the dynamics at play almost instantly. As Karen launched into her rehearsed complaint, Carter raised a hand to stop her, his voice firm but measured. "Ma'am, I'll need to speak with everyone involved before making any determinations." His words, though neutral, carried an undertone that silenced Karen mid-sentence. Turning to Marcus and Lydia, he asked them to share their side. Marcus spoke with quiet dignity, his words painting a picture not just of the day's events but of the broader context that Karen's actions represented. The crowd began to murmur, their voices growing louder as individuals shared their own stories of the Johnsons' kindness and the community they had built. Danny stepped forward, holding up her sketchbook where she had captured the park's vibrant scene, a testament to the harmony Karen had tried to disrupt. The tide was turning, and Karen's once confident posture began to crumble under the weight of the collective voices around her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Officer Carter made his decision. "There's no issue here that requires police intervention," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karen, flustered and humiliated, gathered her belongings and left without another word. The crowd erupted into applause, not out of malice but in celebration of a small victory for justice and community. The Johnsons, though shaken, felt a renewed sense of purpose as they looked around at the faces of their neighbors. This day, which had begun as a simple barbecue, had become a defining moment for Oakwood Park. The threads of the story, Karen's prejudice, Danny's courage, Carter's integrity, and the community's unity, had converged into a tapestry that would not easily be forgotten. The fire that had been ignited was no longer one of division but of hope, a beacon for what could be achieved when people stood together against ignorance and fear. The sun began its descent, casting golden hues across Oakwood Park as the Johnson family's barbecue reached its peak. The aroma of grilled food mingled with the hum of conversation, but the festive atmosphere was abruptly shattered by the arrival of two police officers, summoned by Karen Whitfield's call. The officers approached with caution, their presence drawing the attention of everyone gathered. Marcus stepped forward, calm but resolute, as Lydia instinctively moved closer to their children. Karen, her face a mask of feigned concern, pointed accusingly at the Johnsons. "They're taking over the park, causing a disturbance," she claimed, her voice dripping with entitlement. The crowd fell silent, tension thick in the air. But before the officers could respond, a young woman named Priya, a local teacher and one of the Johnsons' closest friends, stepped forward. "That's not true," she said firmly. "This family has done nothing but bring joy and unity to this community. We won't stand by and let lies tear us apart." What followed was a chorus of voices, neighbors, friends, even strangers, speaking up in defense of the Johnsons. Stories of their kindness, generosity, and unwavering support poured forth, painting a vivid picture of their impact on the community. The officers, visibly moved by the outpouring, turned to Karen. "Ma'am, there's no disturbance here," one of them said. "Perhaps it's time you left." Karen, flustered and humiliated, attempted to argue, but the collective strength of the crowd left her words hollow. As she retreated, the park seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating like a passing storm. Marcus, ever the peacemaker, addressed the gathering. "Thank you all for standing with us today. This isn't just about us, it's about the kind of community we want to build together." The barbecue continued, but it was no longer just a celebration of summer. It had transformed into a testament to solidarity and the power of standing up against prejudice. Karen's actions, though rooted in malice, had inadvertently united the neighborhood in a way no one could have anticipated. By nightfall, as the first stars appeared in the sky, the Johnsons sat around the picnic table with their closest friends, reflecting on the day's events. "We've got a lot of work to do," Lydia said, her voice steady but determined. "But today proved that when we stand together, change is possible." The story of that day spread far beyond Oakwood Park, sparking conversations about privilege, bias, and the importance of community. It was a reminder that even in moments of conflict, there lies an opportunity for growth and understanding. As the last embers of the barbecue faded, one thing was clear: the Johnsons had not just hosted a gathering, they had ignited a movement. Now, it's your turn. Speak up, stand together, and be the change your community needs. The sun dipped lower over Oakwood Park, casting long shadows across the lake as the day's events began to settle into the hearts of those who had witnessed them. The Johnson family's barbecue, once a symbol of unity and joy, had become the epicenter of a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the park's boundaries. Karen Whitfield's call to the police, born of entitlement and prejudice, had sparked a moment of reckoning that no one present would soon forget. When the officers arrived, their initial tension was met with a wall of calm but firm resistance from the community. Neighbors of all backgrounds, many of whom had shared meals and stories with the Johnsons over the years, stepped forward to speak the truth. Lydia's steady voice, filled with both grace and conviction, reminded everyone present of the values that Oakwood Park was meant to represent. Marcus, ever the healer, extended an olive branch even as his children clung to his side, their wide eyes taking in the gravity of the moment. Karen, however, found herself isolated. The murmurs of disapproval from bystanders grew louder as her motivations became clearer. For the first time, she was forced to confront the ugliness of her actions, reflected in the eyes of those around her. It was a humbling moment, though whether it would lead to genuine change remained uncertain. As the officers de-escalated the situation and left without incident, the crowd dispersed slowly, their conversations tinged with a mix of relief and resolve. In the days that followed, the Johnsons became the heart of a larger movement within the community. What had begun as a quiet barbecue transformed into a call for dialogue and action. Town meetings were held, workshops on implicit bias were organized, and the neighborhood began to reckon with the subtle but persistent forces of discrimination that had gone unchallenged for too long. Karen, to her credit, attended these events, though she often sat in the back, her expression unreadable. For Zoe and Tyler, the experience became a lesson in resilience and the power of standing together. They watched as their parents turned pain into purpose, as their neighbors rallied around them, and as their community grew stronger in the face of adversity. The park, once a backdrop for leisure, now held a deeper significance, a place where change had been sparked and where healing could begin. As summer gave way to autumn, the Johnsons hosted another gathering, this time under the golden hues of falling leaves. The turnout was larger than ever, a testament to the bonds that had been forged in the wake of conflict. Karen was there too, quieter than before but present nonetheless, her presence a reminder that growth, however slow, was possible. The events of that fateful Saturday became a story told not just in Oakwood Park but across the nation, a reminder that even the smallest acts of prejudice can have far-reaching consequences, and that the courage to confront them can lead to profound transformation. It was a tale of a family's strength, a community's unity, and the enduring truth that justice, though often delayed, has a way of finding its moment. And so, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the oaks, the Johnsons stood together, surrounded by friends old and new. The lake shimmered with the promise of tomorrow, a tomorrow shaped by the lessons of today. Let this story be a call to action, to listen, to learn, and to stand up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. Because in the end, it is only through understanding and unity that we can hope to build a world where everyone feels they belong.